What happened when my boss fired me in front of the entire office to make an example out of me, only for me to quietly start my own company with 2 coworkers, steal half his clients within a year, and end up buying the very firm that threw me out? They made me an example. It wasn't a whisper or a cutting email that stripped me down. It was fluorescent lights and a conference room full of people I'd spent 5 years trying to make into a team. My boss, Martin Hale, called me into the monthly all-hands under the pretense of recognition. I walked in expecting a plaque, maybe a joke about my terrible taste in mugs. Instead, he had a slide deck. He clicked to a slide that read, "Accountability and Standards." Then he read a list, not of achievements, of mistakes, late deliverables, a missed margin. He narrated the list like a lecture. Then, almost casually, he added, "We can't tolerate this pattern." He looked up at me with that exact mixture of pity and righteous fire that managers save for the day they want to teach the rest of the team a lesson. "We're letting you go," he said. "Effective today." The room made a sound like a tide. Someone shuffled. Someone else coughed. A junior project manager I'd mentored cross-legged at my desk blinked like a child learning a harsh new word. My laptop, the one I'd backed up religiously, was handed to me like a ceremonial object. Blinked like a child learning a harsh new word. My laptop, the one I'd backed up religiously, was handed to me like a ceremonial object. HR read the script about severance and Cobra, and the security guard, polite, single-minded, escorted me to the door like the last panel in a sad play. I walked past people who had smiled at my promotions and job anniversaries for 5 years. No one came with me. Humiliation is anatomical. I felt it in my throat and then in my hands, which shook as I slid my keycard into my pocket. Outside, the city was sunny and indifferent. A dog barked, a barista shouted an order, a bicycle clanged by. I sat on a stoop and watched my team through the glass as they went back to work. Martin walked past the window without speeding up. I wanted to run after him and slap his arrogance like a badge, but the energy required to confront the injustice felt like lifting a refrigerated truck. The first week after being fired is a civics exam on your own life. You ask who you are without the title. Recruiters are a kind of post-breakup text message. Polite, hopeful, transactional. The severance buffered me for 2 months, not enough to feel safe, just enough to feel guilty. And the job market loved buzzwords more than the way I actually solved problems. I did what people do. I rewrote my resume. I went on interviews that felt like auditions, and I took a lot of calls from friends who wanted to help but didn't know how. Lowest points are practical. A bank alert for an overdraft when I forget a bill date. My landlord knocking, not yet angry, just reminding. The pang of standing outside the office that had once felt like a second home and realizing you're unwanted there now. Knocking, not yet angry, just reminding. The pang of standing outside the office that had once felt like a second home and realizing you're unwanted there now. People told me to be furious, to lawyer up, to use the humiliation as fuel. Anger is a fierce animal. It can propel you or eat you. I let it be an ingredient, not a recipe. I slept badly, but I didn't burn bridges. There's an economy to dignity. Keep your receipts, keep your calm, and don't be the person who ruins the small networks you'll need later. The spark came from the thing that always lights small revolutions. 2 people who refused to shrug. Sam, a UX lead with the kind of quiet competence that makes clients pay more without asking, texted first. "Coffee?" The message said. No drama, just a lifeline. Sam had been at Martin's firm nearly as long as I had, and he looked at me with the sort of sympathy that quickly turned into practical planning. Over 2 flat whites in a library calm cafe, we started talking like people who'd been trying to fix an inefficient machine for years. "We both know the places their clients complain about," Sam said. "They want agility. They want us to actually follow through." He gestured like a man arranging pieces on a chessboard. "What if we started something that actually does what people hire consultancies for? Do the work, own the outcome, stop the bullshit." Priya came a week later. She was the account director who could charm a reluctant legal team into saying yes, and she was the person who could make scope creep feel like a neat margin. She'd quietly been handling client politics for years and burning out on the brokerage of promises. At lunch, she said, "We should do this the right way. No client lock-ins, no long elbows, just shorter engagements, transparent pricing, and a real guarantee." And just like that, the 3 of us had a nucleus. Not a manifesto, not even a plan, just a promise. Build a small, nimble practice that solves the actual problems clients pay for instead of selling them strategy reports they'll print and shelve. It felt perversely like honesty after a long era of obfuscation. We moved like people who had nothing to lose but wanted to minimize the gamble. We worked evenings in my small studio apartment, mapping service offerings on post-its and trying to write a 1-sentence value proposition that didn't sound like a consultancy's brochure. We incorporated an LLC, 2 simple operating agreements, a business bank account with a modest overdraft line in case of stupid months. We kept our overhead tiny, Sam's secondhand mid-century desk, Priya's laptop, my modest ability to wangle a legal template from a friend. Call it scrappy, call it bootstrap. The math was simple. If we could stay alive for 12 months, we could prove the model. The first thing we sold wasn't a shiny retainer, it was trust. A mid-sized client, a regional nonprofit that had been burned by our old firm's rote deliverables, hired Sam to rework their donor experience. They wanted better conversion on donation pages, not a glossy deck. Priya cold called their director and arranged a small pilot. 4 weeks, transparent hourly billing, results or we refund. The client took the risk because their last agency had left them paying for brand audits while donors slid away. They wanted someone who'd show up. We did show up. We fixed donation form UX, rewrote email donor journeys, tested copy with small, cheap A/B experiments, experiments. We tracked metrics obsessively. Open rates, conversion funnels, donor LTV. At the 3-week mark, donations rose 8. Momentum is an odd beast. It's not grand. It's a spreadsheet that starts to look less scary. The nonprofit referred a small co-op. Someone else at a coffee shop overheard Priya and asked for a recommendation. Word of mouth in the niches we served was surgical. It bypassed procurement departments and went straight to people who actually had to hit the results. The difference between us and Martin's firm was that we measured what mattered to clients and we were honest when an approach didn't work. That kind of humility is rarer than it should be. Bootstrapping wasn't glamorous. We slept in offices. We split takeout dinners. We negotiated our first tiny payroll with a mixture of pride and terror. We hired a junior developer who'd just left a startup and wanted a real-world portfolio. We taught him how to ship small features fast. We taught ourselves to bill accurately and to avoid scope creep like the plague. We learned to write clean proposals that rivaled any slide deck because the hour had come when practice had to beat performative style. Year 1 was a slog, but the ledger started to smile. Our retainers were small but steady. We reinvested profits into marketing that felt authentic, a short case study newsletter, a tiny event where local founders swapped horror stories and swapped leads. We invested in contracts that protected the client first, a results or refund clause on certain deliverables that made our offers weirdly risk-free to the buyer and forced us to be disciplined. That clause lost us money once. We refunded a small client after a miscalibration, but the PR of being the firm who owned mistakes brought in 3 long-term contracts. People notice honesty. It's good ROI. The first time a client had to decline Martin's firm because of us was the first delicious little taste of karma. A software company that had been with Martin for 3 years was in trouble. Quarterly churn was ugly, onboarding was failing, and the client care felt distant. Their head of growth called me because he'd heard from a friend that we moved fast. He wanted help. We offered a 90-day sprint, prioritized onboarding fixes, and promised measurable churn reduction. We delivered. Onboarding time shrank, crash reports dropped, churn dropped 12% in 2 months. They flew our logo onto their site with a delivered results badge. The pride was, I won't lie, like a warm drink on a shivery night. Word spread. The perverse reward for keeping a low profile was that the market came to us. Clients began to compare us not to the flashy firms that sold promises, but to the no-nonsense shop that made product teams actually work. By month 16, we had 5 full-time people, a small office above a bakery that smelled like cardamom in the mornings, and a backlog that let us be picky. The choice was delicious. Grow with intention or chase breadth and risk what made us good. There were days I wanted to run back to that conference room and smash Martin's slide deck under my palm. There were nights when pride loosened like a splinter and I wept at the ceiling because this was expensive work, to be patient, to be build rather than spectacle. But the new company, we named it Open Bridge because we liked the quiet irony, became an engine for decent work. We did honest proposals, protected staff from burnout, and instituted a profit-sharing model because we had scars and we didn't want to pass them on. Part 1 ends not with a crowd scene of vindication, but with a small, satisfying detail. A Monday morning when I walked into our tiny office, and someone, not me, not Sam, had pinned a printed email from a client to the corkboard. It read in plain type, "You showed up. Thanks for saving our launch." I ran my fingers over the paper like a benediction. The rest of the story is mechanical and human. How we converted more of Martin's clients by being competent and kind. How we dealt with offers and temptations. How the company we'd been fired from slowly looked less like a fortress and more like a house with an unlocked back door. It's not a revenge tale of sabotage or villainy. It's the other kind that feels rarer. Strategic patience, honest work, and the right kind of arrogance. The arrogance that believes competence will eventually outcompete performative authority. If you want part 2, I'll take you through the growth spurt, how we landed the first big account that made the old firm sweat, how we resisted a shady buyout, and the quiet little moment when the CEO who fired me started to call our office looking for help. The win that made the old firm sweat didn't arrive like a movie montage. It arrived as a panic call from a client of a client on a Thursday afternoon and a Saturday sprint that felt like hyped adrenaline and prayer. Skylark Retail was the kind of brand you see on billboards and think, they've solved everything. Mid-market DTC fashion brand, pretty margins, aggressive ad buy. They'd been with Martin's firm for 3 years, and despite the retainer, their last 3 launches had cratered. Ad costs rose. Landing pages didn't convert. Their checkout tech caused an uptick in cart abandonment. The head of growth, Maya, closed the phone on her vendor and cold emailed me after a friend forwarded a case study we'd posted, our results or refund pilot with a nonprofit. She asked 2 things. Can you get us a 15% higher checkout conversion in 8 weeks? And will you do the work in public so my board sees progress? We said yes. Saying yes was one thing. Doing the work was plumbing. We designed a surgical sprint, analytics, quick user testing, checkout flow rebuild, targeted copy, and a 2-week ad test to pair the changes for a real lift. Sam owned UX, Priya ran client comms and scope, and I got to be the project quarterback, tuning priorities, triaging surprises, negotiating with the client's CFO about acceptable risk. We hired a short-term performance engineer, Noor, who rewired the site's third-party scripts to reduce latency and fixed a bug that caused payment retries to fail on older phones, one of those invisible things that eats conversions. The first week, the metrics barely budged. The second week, we switched swapped a guest checkout flow into a simpler one-tap mobile layout. We rewrote order confirmation queues to reduce buyer anxiety. Payment retry success climbed. The ad landing pages matched the new copy. On day 18, conversion ticked up 9%. On day 25, it was 13%. At day 36, after an iterative ad creative that emphasized returnable with free shipping, conversion hit 17%. Maya cried on a Zoom, quiet, grateful, and sent the spreadsheet link to her board. They reallocated ad spend into the new funnel and extended our contract. Skylark's lift was the kind of proof that smells like coffee and quiet revision. It didn't make headlines, but it made people call. The client who used to be a warm lead now sent a note. Whoever helped you with Skylark, can they help us? Referrals accelerated like dominoes. By month 20, OpenBridge had 6 mid-market clients, 3 of them former clients of Martin's firm who'd quietly stopped renewing after seeing our results. That momentum birthed new problems. Growth is an operational test. Can your delivery scale with increased demand while maintaining the craft that made you good? We wrestled with the typical startup problems: cash management, retain enough cash for payroll and deposits, hiring who scales culture without diluting it, and most delicate of all, identity. Do we remain scrappy and principled when the contracts swell? Hiring who scales culture without diluting it, and most delicate of all, identity. Do we remain scrappy and principled when the contracts swell? We hired a head of ops, Deshaun, who'd run a 60-person team at a fintech and laughed at scope creep like it was an annoying relative. Deshaun tightened onboarding, introduced a 2-week sprint cadence for implementation, and made sure our results or refund contracts had realistic success criteria so we weren't betting the farm on impossible KPIs. Investors noticed. A small VC with a taste for scalable service plays offered us a seed check with growth strings attached, hire a sales head, ramp to a 100-person shop in 2 years, and take a board seat. It was flattering. For 5 minutes, we allowed ourselves the fantasy of rapid growth. Then, Priya and I sat at my kitchen table and did the math on dilution and cultural erosion. We liked the idea of more runway, but not at the price of selling our productized soul. We declined politely. A month later, a more slippery offer arrived, a strategic buyout from a regional agency group that wanted to fold us into a stack of units and put Martin's name on the pitch list. They offered cash enough to let all of us buy houses and fund 2 years of growth, but the deal meant they'd absorb OpenBridge into an existing corporate machine and push us to chase enterprise scale and standardized offerings. I remember the silence in the room when the term sheet hit our inbox. There were spreadsheets, projections, an enticing number at the bottom. We gathered the team in the bakery-adjacent office and laid everything open, what we'd gain, what we'd risk. Sam, never theatrical, said, "We're good at making things actually work." Deshaun, who'd come from an environment where growth had eaten morale, said, "You can sell the company for cash or you can sell the company's soul." We voted unanimous no. We were not unlike craftsmen who'd rather keep their shop than a golden buyout check that came with corporate hooks. The choice cost us years of potential cash, but it kept the company's North Star intact: measurable outcomes, humane work, and profit sharing. That integrity turned into a surprising business advantage. Some of Martin's clients wanted results, yes, but they also wanted a partner who wouldn't ghost when the product shipped. When we won Skylark, 2 of their peers who'd been quietly unhappy approached us for proposals. We won them not on price, but on the credibility of our methodology and our guarantee. The more we delivered, the more the conversation shifted industry-wide. Competence, not performative authority, began to be the conversation. Word travels fastest when it saves money. And then the calls started coming from an address I never expected: Martin. He didn't call with threats or gloating. He called with a voice like someone who'd swallowed a lot of pride and then choked on it. He didn't call with threats or gloating. He called with a voice like someone who'd swallowed a lot of pride and then choked on it. "Can you help?" "We have a client bleeding," he said. He stopped himself from continuing like the sentence weighed him. He asked for a consult. He didn't say the firm's name. He couldn't bring himself to ask for a contract outright. When I asked what happened, he stammered through a litany of missed SLAs, churn, and some disastrous redesign that had been signed off by a new director who'd never been on a product release. His tone had the salt and talc mix of someone who had been hoisted on their own hubris. It was a complication wrapped in an opportunity. On the surface, Martin's plea made my head swim with childish joy. He'd staged the meeting where they'd humiliated me, and now he was asking for help. It would have been easy, too easy, to hang up with a curt no. But the calculus was subtler. If we fixed his mess, we could A. Prove our chops beyond the clients we already had. B. Create an opening to pitch the rescued client to us formally. C. Demonstrate to the market that the old guard could be outplayed by quieter competence. If we refused out of spite, we risked looking petty. If we accepted, we risked being absorbed back into the very dynamics we'd rejected. So I made a choice that felt like the thing I'd been building toward for months. I set terms. No freebies, no public PR. If Martin wanted help, we'd do a short paid triage, a 2-week code and UX triage, a prioritized list, and a staged remediation with clear acceptance gates. If the firm wanted us to continue beyond triage, it would be on a normal retainer and with written commitments. He agreed, reluctantly, with the thinness of a man ashamed, but he agreed. That first triage was brutal. We identified critical failures in their release pipeline, ragged artifacts in their design system that caused regressions across screens, and a broken QA process that had enabled a payment bug to slip through. We worked nights, shipped a fix, and stabilized the client's site. The client we rescued, an enterprise SMB, let's call them Hearth & Co., was grateful and immediately began to ask if we'd consider running their product onboarding as an external vendor. They were cagey in public. They didn't want to air internal laundry, but their procurement team was practical. The truth was the product was patched, adoption rose, and they wanted continuity. Martin's firm offered us a referral fee. I turned it down. Hearth & Co. offered us a meeting. We pitched straight. An 18-month engagement, knowledge transfer to their internal team, and performance-based compensation. They signed. They moved the work to us. The irony had teeth. The company that had publicly shamed me was now a source of inbound revenue because their sloppy governance had made our services desirable. The play was complete in a low, elegant way. We hadn't burned any bridges for show. We'd eaten the humiliations, built competence, and now, patiently and professionally, we're turning other people's failures into opportunities to scale our ethics as a business model. When the first paycheck from Hearth & Co. hit, it was less about the money and more about the confirmation, method, spectacle. That week, Sam and Priya and I stood in the kitchen of our little office and toasted with bad boxed wine. We'd built something not to be vindictive, but to be durable. The old firm still loomed. Its receptionist still made small talk in the lobby, and Martin still pretended everything was fine. But OpenBridge had a rhythm now, clients that trusted us, and a posture of competence that no slide deck could replace. Martin's calls continued, softer each time. He began, slowly, to ask about strategy rather than dignity. The next move in the story is the one that makes people lean forward. Can you buy the firm that fired me? Can you turn the stage into back-office clerical work? But that's the next part, where the patience that got us here faces the ethical and financial decisions of takeover. I'll tell you, the ledger at that stage matters more than the applause. By the time Martin's firm had called us for the third quiet rescue, the writing was on the wall. OpenBridge wasn't the underdog anymore. We were the safety net, the problem solver, the team companies called when they were tired of slide decks and excuses. Our name traveled in whispers. They're small, but they actually fix things. What had once been humiliation in a conference room had turned into reputation in boardrooms. Martin, meanwhile, was drowning in the same arrogance that had once made him so dangerous. His firm still had the glossy offices, the branded pens, the assistants with headsets, but inside, it was hollow. Senior staff were leaving. Clients were defecting. Even his own team had started calling OpenBridge the grown-ups when projects spun out of control. It was Priya who spotted the opportunity first. She slid a printed article onto my desk one morning. It was a business journal piece about regional consolidation in the consultancy space. Buried in the middle was a line. Hale & Partners has reportedly lost 3 key accounts this quarter and is rumored to be exploring strategic options. Strategic options was polite code for one thing, a sale. I laughed out loud. You think? Priya's face was serious. He's vulnerable, and if he sells to the wrong buyer, they'll cannibalize the clients. But if we move first, we could own the whole damn thing. The thought stunned me. Buying the firm that had fired me? Walking back into those glass offices not as an employee, but as the owner? The part of me that still remembered Martin's smirk during that public firing wanted it for revenge. But the part of me that had been running OpenBridge long enough knew the real value wasn't spite. It was leverage. If we bought Hale & Partners, we'd double our book overnight. We'd inherit their infrastructure, their client list, their senior staff who still knew valuable things, and most importantly, we'd erase the last vestige of Martin's authority in the market. The boardroom we set up wasn't fancy, just our bakery-adjacent office with Deshaun at the whiteboard, Sam and Priya on laptops, Rosa with her spreadsheets. We ran scenarios like surgeons. Could we afford it? What debt structures would keep us safe? How many of their clients were salvageable? Rosa showed the math. If we bought them at fire sale value, cut their overhead, and retained just half the clients, the acquisition would pay for itself in 18 months. I called a broker I trusted, someone who knew the local consultancy scene. Within a week, he confirmed it. Martin was shopping for buyers. Quietly, desperately. The first meeting was surreal. We didn't meet in a boardroom. We met in a hotel lobby cafe. As if he didn't want anyone to see him talking to me. Martin looked older. Not dramatically, but enough. Lines around his eyes, hair thinner, his posture less certain. He tried to keep his voice confident, but I could hear the strain. You've built something impressive, he admitted, stirring his coffee too long. You've been taking accounts, I respect it. But I need to find a way forward for my team. For the brand. For the brand. For the brand. That was Martin, still thinking of his name as an empire. I didn't flinch. We're interested, I said. But not at your asking price. We'd be buying liabilities as well as assets. Let's be honest, your clients are already calling us. He winced, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the humiliation in his eyes. The same humiliation he'd once orchestrated for me. The negotiations dragged for weeks. His pride inflated his numbers. Our spreadsheets deflated them. Back and forth. Finally, when his CFO hinted that payroll was being covered by a bridge loan, we knew he had no choice. We named a number, less than a quarter of what he'd hoped for. Cash and assumption of select liabilities. He signed. On a gray Tuesday morning, the paperwork closed. OpenBridge acquired Hale & Partners. I walked through those familiar glass doors not as an employee, not as the humiliated example, but as the owner. Staff gathered in the lobby, whispering. Some of them had been in the room the day Martin fired me. Now they were waiting for me to speak. I kept it simple. Some of you know me, some of you don't. What you need to know is this. We're not here to humiliate anyone. We're here to do the work, keep the clients, and build something real. If you want to stay, you'll have jobs. If you want to leave, you'll have respect. But this company, it's OpenBridge now. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then more. Relief spread like oxygen. Martin wasn't there. He'd signed the papers and disappeared. Later, I heard he moved out of state, tried to start something smaller. It never gained traction. His name no longer carried weight. Ours did. That first quarter after the acquisition was chaos, merging systems, cutting bloated expenses, retraining staff to deliver instead of decorate. But it worked. Within 6 months, we'd integrated their best clients, let go of the toxic ones, and doubled our revenue. OpenBridge wasn't just a scrappy upstart anymore. We were the market leader. And one night, after a 12-hour day of onboarding new hires, I walked into the old conference room where Martin had once humiliated me. The projector screen still worked. The long table still gleamed. I sat at the head of it, alone, and let myself remember the sting of that day. Then I smiled. Because the revenge wasn't firing him in return. It wasn't the acquisition. It wasn't even the money. The revenge was walking into that same room, head held high, knowing I'd built something so strong that no one could ever do to me what he'd done, and that every single person in that room now worked under my name. The first weeks after the acquisition felt like herding cattle through a thunderstorm. Systems were broken, morale was lower than payroll, and half the senior staff were polishing resume. Systems were broken, morale was lower than payroll, and half the senior staff were polishing resumes. The old Hale and Partners office was all glass and chrome, but behind the shine it smelled of fear. People whispered in hallways, wondering if I was here to gut the place, wondering if they'd be next. I didn't fire anyone to make a point. That was Martin's style. Instead, I walked floor by floor, shook hands, listened. I asked 3 questions to everyone, from interns to VPs. What's broken? What would you fix first? What do you need to do your job right? By the end of the week, my notebook was filled with the same answer repeated 50 times. Stop selling dreams we can't deliver. So that became our mantra. We stripped down the bloated service menu Martin had built to impress investors. No more innovation labs that produced glossy PDFs and nothing else. No more endless retainers with no accountability. We kept what worked: UX sprints, conversion lifts, customer journey audits, and we tied everything to measurable outcomes. Results or refund wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was our operating system. Some staff left. I didn't chase them. They thrived on politics and spectacle. They had no place in a shop built on receipts, but most stayed. And something surprising happened. As we simplified, morale rose. People who'd been drowning in meaningless decks started shipping actual work. Clients noticed. Calls that used to start with tension started with gratitude. Within a year, OpenBridge had not only retained Hale's best accounts, we'd grown them. The office itself transformed. Gone were the cavernous, intimidating conference rooms Martin loved. We opened spaces, built collaborative pods, let teams decorate walls with live dashboards instead of fake mission statements. Culture shifted from fear to ownership. Deshaun set up profit sharing. Rosa implemented transparency in budgets so everyone saw where the money went. For the first time, staff knew the company's health wasn't a rumor. It was a number on the wall. And me? I kept my promise. No humiliation. No one would ever be fired as a spectacle again. If someone underperformed, we coached. If they still couldn't cut it, we parted ways with dignity. I knew too well the sting of being made an example. Revenge wasn't repeating it. It was erasing it from the culture forever. 2 years later, OpenBridge was unrecognizable. We doubled headcount, opened a second office, and were being courted by Fortune 500s. But the true victory wasn't scale. It was reputation. In an industry full of overpromisers, we were known as the firm that delivered, the one that told the truth, even when it cost us a contract. We were boring, predictable, accountable. And in business, that's gold. Martin? He faded into the background. I heard he tried starting another consultancy, but without his old Rolodex and reputation, maybe he finally learned humility. Maybe not, but it didn't matter. His shadow no longer stretched over me. One afternoon, I found myself alone again in that same conference room where it all began. The long table gleamed. The projector hummed. I remembered the slide that once bore my name under accountability and standards. I remembered the hot shame of being walked out under fluorescent lights. And then I looked around. The room was filled now with the hum of real work, not humiliation, but creation. People who'd once watched me fall were now thriving under a culture I'd built. That was the legacy. Not revenge, not even the buyout, but the knowledge that I'd taken the worst moment of my professional life and turned it into a foundation for something better, stronger, more humane. When younger staff asked about the story, about why we were so relentless about fairness, I told them the truth. Because I know what it feels like to be humiliated, and I promised myself no one in this building would ever feel that way again. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had made me an example had become a footnote. The company that had thrown me out was now the crown jewel of my portfolio. And I, the one they thought was disposable, had become the steward of a culture that outlived them all. Because the sweetest revenge isn't taking someone down. It's building something they can never take away from you.